is a new location in the Atomfall universe.
Bugger me.
It's an expansion to the existing story and a new part of the geography of the quarantine zone that the player gets to explore. They find their way there from Wyndham Village and uncover additional mysteries, additional plot threads, new characters, new locations, new ways out of the quarantine zone. The structure of Atomfall allows us to add new locations that connect to that large mystery that the player is uncovering.
Welcome to Midsummer Island. Nice, isn't it?
Wicked Isle is a location in that sort. It has new plot threads for the player to uncover. It has a kind of folk horror-ish tone to it. We decided that was one of the strongest tones that emerged in Atomfall itself, and we thought we'd really double down on it in a new location. So the player goes back into the history of the Druids, uncovers their relationship to the local area and their perspective on the trigger event that happened hundreds of years ago that ultimately led to the Windscale disaster. So Wicked Isle has its own self-contained mysteries to uncover, self-contained story, but that story is part of the larger mystery of Atomfall. So for new players, it will all interleave together perfectly. For returning players, it will give them new layers to the story to uncover.
This isn't over. I'm not letting go.
The tone of Wicked Isle is different to the main game because it really drills down into that folk horror atmosphere. The mainland is very bright and sunny, quite friendly, very green and unpleasant land. The Wicked Isle has a storm casting overhead that's coming from the Windscale plant itself that may be having an influence on the people on the island, so it's much more tense and mysterious and very much more folk horror. So there's a clear influence from folk horror in Wicked Isle, but we also looked back at the real historical reference points for Druidic history.
Be more careful for cat.
We used this to build the main game, and a lot of the plot threads that we built into the narrative we didn't have an opportunity to explore, so we used Wicked Isle as an opportunity to double down on some extra details for the player to uncover. We also looked at the dissolution of the monasteries, which is a real historical event that happened in the UK in the 1600s or so. In our timeline, the abbey was dissolved in the 1600s or so for some mysterious reasons that you uncover as part of the story. This is based in real historical events because we found that the rich history of the UK was a perfect place to build in these layers into the Atomfall universe. The player will meet more new enemies and factions on the Wicked Isle. So the Wicked Isle has its own local variants on the Druids that are built more into this idea of being the remains of an old abbey and tending to the mysteries that were within that abbey. Don't want to spoil the story too much, but there's a load of extra texture and more kind of pagan perspectives there. There's also a faction of bandits that have styled themselves like pirates on the island, and they've got new weapons to tackle the player and for the player to take from them. There are also more mutants out on the island because of some of the experiments that Bard were doing there. There's a particularly noticeable variant on the ferals that is much more aquatic, will sneak in the water and pounce to attack the player. The inhabitants of the island have placed themselves there in exile. As part of this quarantine, they've built their own local culture and perspectives on what's happened. That's not to say they are completely separate from the mainland. The player will be sent back and forth from the island to uncover new plot threads, and uncover new stories, and perhaps find new ways out of the quarantine zone. So the player will find a new range of weaponry on the Wicked Isle. They will find cutlass, which is used by the pirates, as well as a blunderbuss, which is a super-powered shotgun. The Druid faction also have daggers, which are built from a mysterious glowing material and are critical to the story that the player uncovers on the island. So when developing Wicked Isle, two key real-world reference points that were interesting for us were Lindisfarne, the Holy Island, which is a small separated isle that has an abbey on it, and the other was Anthrax Island in Scotland, which was used for anthrax tests in World War II and was therefore a location that people couldn't visit without contracting anthrax. So we decided to combine these two vibes of this ancient ruins and top secret bard experiments, and it gives the whole island a kind of barren, inhospitable vibe, a feeling of going somewhere that you're unwelcome. So building Wicked Isle gave us a real opportunity to double down on taking some of the themes that we had in the main game, exaggerating them and coming up with new combinations. When you're building a toolkit to make a game, you often kind of make options for yourself and explore as you're making the game what's interesting and not interesting. We had a really interesting toolkit in the main game, but we hadn't kind of squeezed all of the fun out of it. So it was very interesting to take things like our forest generation and infect them with alien blue materials, or to completely ruin a village so it seems like it's been entirely abandoned for years. It allowed us to take the language of the game that we already had and put an interesting twist on it. It was also a great place to put some more garden gnomes to hide for the player to smash up. So Midsummer Island, the Wicked Isle, is physically separated from the main game, but you can travel there by boat and then you learn how to return by yourself. So it has interest within itself, but it is connected to the wider game. We decided to do this because of the interesting structure of Atomfall, in that the whole location is completely interconnected and the player can explore wherever they see fit. It seemed like the most natural fit, and it seems like it makes the whole thing the most interesting. So the structure of Atomfall means that the story within the Wicked Isle has to be connected to that larger narrative. You know, that leans into the strengths and most interesting parts of the game itself. What we thought was a really good story to tell in that space was to double down on some of the lore that we built for the main game but never had an opportunity to tell. In our case, that's the history of the Abbey, how it relates to the druids that ended up in the woods, and how they all relate to the disaster that happened. The roots of the Windscale disaster in our narrative are rooted hundreds of years in the past. So the timeline of this Abbey ruin lets the player understand the very, very earliest point that caused this whole narrative to take place. The DLC integrates into the main game. Players access it by heading to Wyndham Village, finding a boatman who's looking for help, as the player has found in the main story.
How do? Where did you come from then?
They are an outsider, and that gives them a unique perspective on the quarantine zone and the disaster that's happened in it. So we introduce a new character who wants to take you to the Wicked Isle. Wicked Isle also adds new endings to the base game. That's another thing that seems natural to the structure of Atomfall, that the story drives to the key mystery in the Windscale plant. The Wicked Isle itself has its own perspective, and therefore people will offer you ways out if you resolve the mystery in a different way.